The vast expanse of space stretched infinitely, dotted with countless stars and swirling nebulae. Amidst this cosmic canvas, the Galactic Council's capital stood as a monumental beacon of power and influence. A massive space station, built into the heart of an ancient asteroid, housed the leaders of every known alien species in the galaxy. The council chambers, where the fate of entire civilizations was decided, were designed to reflect the vastness and grandeur of the galaxy itself. As the human delegation entered, the weight of the moment was undeniable. Captain Xander, a tall, rugged human with a commanding presence, led the small group of humans through the colossal metallic halls. His mind raced as he thought about the gravity of their mission. Earth, his home, was about to be judged by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Their goal was simple: to secure Earth's place in the galactic trade network. Yet, as Xander looked at the alien delegates seated in their grandiose thrones, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be an easy negotiation. The council chamber was filled with an array of alien species, each more technologically advanced than the last. Their bodies were strange and unnerving, some with shimmering skin, others with multiple limbs, and some entirely machine-based, powered by artificial intelligence. Xander's team stood in the center, surrounded by beings who towered over them. Every gaze was fixed on the human delegation, scrutinizing them as if they were insects. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Xander could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. At the far end of the room, the Council King sat upon his ornate throne. A towering figure, his body was an elegant fusion of organic and mechanical elements, his skin glowing faintly with a deep purple hue. His ancient eyes gleamed with an unsettling intelligence, and his long, delicate fingers drummed slowly on the armrest. Despite his regal appearance, there was an air of arrogance about him, a belief that his species had reached the pinnacle of evolution, with no room for lesser beings like humans. As Xander and his team stood before him, the king sneered, his voice echoing through the chamber with a rich, mocking tone. "So Earth has finally decided to show up. How quaint." His words were sharp, dripping with disdain. "You humans believe you can join our galactic network. Your world, with its primitive technology and infantile culture." His laughter, cold and bitter, echoed through the chamber. The tension in the room grew thicker as every alien delegate exchanged glances. Xander's fists clenched at his sides, his body tense. He had heard whispers of the Galactic Council's condescending views on humanity, but hearing them spoken aloud was something entirely different. His jaw tightened as the king continued his verbal assault. "You are nothing but ants in the grand scheme of the galaxy," the king declared, his voice ringing with authority. "Your achievements are laughable, your world a joke. Do you honestly believe you belong here? You are far beneath us, and you always will be." The words stung more than Xander had anticipated. The human delegation stood in silence, their pride and dignity being stripped away before their very eyes. The king's words were like daggers, each one designed to wound. But Xander knew this moment was more than just an insult to his people. It was a defining moment for humanity's future. Would they bow their heads and accept the council's judgment, or would they rise to challenge the immense power standing before them? As the king's gaze shifted to Xander, something inside the human captain snapped. The mockery, the arrogance, the dismissiveness, it all collided in a flash of burning fury. He could feel his blood boil, his heart racing in his chest. Every nerve in his body screamed for action. He had spent years building up to this moment, fighting for the chance to represent Earth. And now he was being humiliated in front of the galaxy. The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was fixed on Xander, waiting to see how he would respond. The camera, or rather, the narrative voice, zoomed in on Xander's clenched fists. His knuckles were white from the pressure, his arms trembling. He stood tall, despite the overwhelming sense of power in the room. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear: he could not, and would not, let this go unchallenged. The king's eyes narrowed as he watched Xander, an amused smile creeping onto his face. "What is it, human?" the king taunted. "Are you going to argue your way out of this, or are you going to do something foolish?" His voice was cold, his tone dripping with amusement. He leaned forward slightly, the entire chamber holding its breath. Xander could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The room was locked in a tense standoff, the king's words lingering in the air like poison. Xander's mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. His training, his experiences, all led to this point. He could feel the weight of Earth's future pressing down on him. But more than that, he could feel the anger that had been building up inside him for so long. His people had been underestimated for far too long. His world had been overlooked, ridiculed, and dismissed as insignificant. But Xander knew something the king didn't. Humanity had always been underestimated, and that had always been their strength. In a swift, unexpected motion, Xander stepped forward. His body moved with purpose, the anger inside him now turning into raw determination. The room seemed to freeze as his hand shot out, a resounding slap echoing through the chamber. The sound was like thunder, reverberating off the cold, metallic walls. The king's head snapped to the side, his eyes wide in shock. The alien ruler staggered back, his glowing eyes flashing with fury. For a moment, there was utter silence. The king's regal demeanor had vanished in an instant, replaced by a look of complete and utter disbelief. He had never been touched, never been challenged like this before. The entire chamber stood in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Xander stood there, his chest heaving with anger, his face set in a mask of defiance. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had done it. He had taken the first step in showing the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. As the king slowly regained his composure, his eyes locked onto Xander with a deadly intensity. The smile had vanished from his face, replaced by a deep, simmering rage. "You'll regret this, human," the king hissed. "You dare strike me, the ruler of the galaxy. You have no idea what you've just started." But Xander was unshaken. "I know exactly what I started," he replied, his voice steady. "It's time for the galaxy to learn who we are." The tension in the room was thick, the air crackling with anticipation. The king's fury was palpable, and the other delegates seemed uncertain, not knowing how to respond to the unthinkable act they had just witnessed. But one thing was clear: humanity had just made its mark in the most shocking and unforgettable way possible. This was only the beginning. The Galactic Council's shocked when a human slaps the king. The shockwave of Xander's defiant act reverberated through the Grand Council chamber. The king's head had just been slapped, and the whole room was frozen in disbelief. Not a single sound could be heard as Xander stood tall, his chest heaving with the adrenaline of the moment. His heart pounded in his chest, but his eyes were calm, locked onto the king's furious face. Every alien delegate in the room seemed stunned by what they had just witnessed. The most powerful being in the galaxy, humiliated in front of his peers by a mere human. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The king, staggered by the blow, slowly straightened up. His glowing eyes, which once gleamed with condescension, now burned with the fury of 1,000 suns. His lips curled into a snarl, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. The chamber was thick with anticipation. Every eye was on Xander. The silence was suffocating, like the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The king's voice shattered the silence. "You dare strike me, human, the ruler of this galaxy. You are nothing. Nothing but a weak, insignificant speck in the grand scheme of things. You will regret this decision." His voice was dripping with venom, his words cutting through the room like a blade. His tone was chilling, and the air around him seemed to crackle with his rage. Xander, unfazed by the king's venomous words, stood his ground. His face was stoic, but inside, he felt the weight of the moment. He had known the risks when he stepped into the council chambers, but never had he imagined that things would escalate to this point. He had come to represent Earth, to make sure humanity would be taken seriously in the galactic community. But now, everything had changed. This wasn't just about Earth's future anymore. This was about defying the very system that had oppressed countless worlds, including his own. The king's eyes bore into Xander, his anger building to an almost palpable intensity. "What do you think you've done, human?" The king sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Do you think this foolish act will somehow give you the upper hand? You are nothing more than a primitive backward species. Your pitiful planet is nothing compared to the might of the Galactic Council." The room seemed to close in on Xander. The weight of the king's words pressed down on him, yet he remained resolute. He knew that he had to stay calm, that his actions would shape the future of his people. His fingers twitched, and he could feel his body tense up. The words of the king stung, but Xander had something the king didn't: the indomitable will of humanity. For a brief second, Xander looked around the room, his gaze meeting the eyes of his fellow human delegates. They were all standing in stunned silence, too afraid to speak, too afraid to even breathe. The alien delegates, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. They watched the exchange like it was some sort of game, their cold, calculating eyes gleaming with amusement. The imbalance of power was staggering. Xander and his people were mere ants in a sea of giants, but that was what made humanity unique. Humans never gave up. They never backed down. And today, Xander would show the galaxy that they were no longer to be underestimated. The king's voice broke through Xander's thoughts. "Do you honestly think your species could ever stand up to the might of the Galactic Council?" he mocked. His tone was laced with condescension, as though the very idea of a human standing up to him was laughable. The room was deathly quiet. Every alien in the chamber seemed to be waiting for Xander's response. Would he shrink away, bow his head, and beg for mercy? Or would he rise to the challenge? Xander's eyes narrowed as he took a step forward. The sudden movement caught the attention of everyone in the room. The silence was thick with tension, the air electric. Xander's breathing became shallow, his pulse quickening. He could feel his heart thundering in his chest. He knew the eyes of the galaxy were upon him. This was more than just a slap. This was the defining moment for humanity. A single step forward, and the entire fate of his species could change forever. As Xander moved closer to the king's throne, memories flooded his mind. His thoughts flashed back to Earth's history, the wars, the struggles, the long, hard-fought battles that had shaped his people. He remembered the first steps of humanity on the moon, the perseverance of the human race in the face of adversity. He remembered the times when humans were told they could never achieve greatness, yet they always found a way. He remembered the sacrifices of those who had fought and died to secure a future for Earth, a future now at risk. Xander's breath quickened as he recalled the defining moments of human triumph. His chest tightened with the weight of those memories, and his resolve grew stronger. He wasn't just fighting for Earth now. He was fighting for every human who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, or too insignificant. He was fighting for every person who had struggled, fought, and bled for a better future. And now, in this room, he was going to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The king watched Xander with an expression of pure disdain. "What are you waiting for, human?" he taunted. "Are you going to beg for your life? Are you going to apologize for your insolence?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, his amusement evident in every syllable. But Xander didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step forward. His eyes locked onto the king's. The room seemed to shrink around him. The alien delegates, who had once been so smug and self-assured, now looked uncomfortable. They had underestimated Xander, just as they had underestimated humanity. The king's power was not absolute, and Xander intended to prove it. In that moment, the camera zoomed in on Xander's face, showing the intensity of his focus. His eyes were cold, unwavering. His thoughts were clear. He would not bow. He would not surrender. He would stand tall in the face of this challenge. This was not just about him. It was about the entire human race. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity was not a species to be ridiculed or dismissed. The king's face twisted with rage as he realized that Xander wasn't backing down. His nostrils flared. His body tensed with anger. "You insolent fool," the king hissed. "You have no idea what you've done. You've just signed your species' death warrant." His voice shook with fury, but Xander remained calm, his resolve unbroken. He could feel the heat of the king's rage, but it only made him more determined. Xander took another step forward, his voice steady and strong. "No, king," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "What I've just done is show you that humanity will not bow. We will not cower in the face of threats, and we will never be your slaves." The king's eyes widened, and for a split second, the arrogance that had defined his rule seemed to falter. The room was silent again, the weight of Xander's words hanging in the air. For the first time, the king seemed unsure of himself. The smug superiority he had once radiated was gone, replaced by a cold, seething fury. The silence was broken by a soft, almost imperceptible sound, the hum of energy in the air, as if the very atmosphere had shifted. The tension in the room was unbearable, and the rest of the delegates watched in rapt silence. Xander stood unwavering, his eyes fixed on the king. This wasn't just a moment of defiance. This was a moment that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The battle had only just begun. The Galactic Council's shocked when a human slaps the king. The tension in the Galactic Council chamber was suffocating. Alien species from all corners of the galaxy gathered to watch the human delegation led by Captain Xander. They had come to discuss Earth's future in the intergalactic trade network, but what was about to unfold would change everything. Xander's calm, stoic demeanor hid the storm of emotions raging inside him, his anger rising as the king of the Galactic Council mocked humanity. It started with words, a mocking tone, a sneer from the king, who belittled Earth's achievements. He called them ants, insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But as the insults piled on, Xander's patience was wearing thin. The king had gone too far, and Xander knew something had to be done. His fists clenched, and his jaw tightened. He had come here to represent Earth, but now he had a duty to defend humanity's honor. The room was still as the king's mocking words rang in Xander's ears. "You humans are nothing. You think you can stand up to the might of the Galactic Council." The king's voice was thick with disdain, and his glowing eyes fixed on Xander with an arrogance that made the entire room quake with the weight of his authority. But Xander didn't flinch. He wasn't going to let the king continue to belittle his people. The eyes of every alien in the room were on him, and he felt their cold, calculating gaze. Yet, instead of bowing his head in shame, he stood tall. His posture was firm, and his heart beat with purpose. He was no longer just Captain Xander. He was the embodiment of Earth's defiance. For a brief, agonizing moment, the tension in the room was unbearable. The council members, those who had once looked at Earth with condescension, watched with bated breath. The king sneered again, a smug look crossing his alien face. "Do you honestly think your species could ever stand up to the might of the Galactic Council?" The room was so still, it felt like time itself had frozen. Xander didn't answer with words. His silence was all the response the king needed, but it wasn't the answer anyone had expected. Without another thought, Xander's hand moved faster than anyone could process. With a swift, powerful motion, he raised his hand and slapped the king across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the chamber, sharp and loud, breaking the stillness like a thunderclap. It was a single, decisive action that shook the very foundations of the room. The shock was immediate. The king stumbled back, his eyes wide in disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The council members gasped, their mouths hanging open, unable to process the audacity of the act. The room, once filled with an air of superiority from the Galactic Council, was now paralyzed in shock. The camera zoomed in on Sanders' face, capturing the burning intensity in his eyes. His jaw was clenched, his chest heaving with the adrenaline that coursed through his veins. His heart pounded in his ears, but his eyes never wavered from the king's stunned face. The king, still reeling from the blow, shook his head in disbelief, as if trying to comprehend what had just occurred. The alien delegates exchanged nervous glances. The unexpected slap had shattered the tension, but it had also raised 1,000 questions. Was this an act of courage or foolishness? The alien species, known for their advanced technology and ruthless dominance, had never faced such open defiance. What would happen next? Would they retaliate? Would the king demand retribution, or would he try to salvage his dignity? Sanders stood his ground, unmoving. His heart raced, but he didn't back down. He had crossed a line, but there was no turning back now. The room was still, the silence deafening. Even the air seemed thick with anticipation. It was as if the entire galaxy had paused to watch, to see how the king would respond. The king's face twisted into a mask of fury, his eyes narrowing into slits of burning rage. He was no longer just the leader of the Galactic Council. He was a wounded ruler, his pride shattered by a single human. The tension in the room grew to a boiling point. The council members exchanged whispers, murmuring among themselves, unsure of how to react. Some of the aliens shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes flicking between Sander and the king. The power dynamics had just shifted in an instant. The king's authority, once unchallenged, now seemed fragile, and Sander, despite being the smallest species in the room, stood as if he were the tallest. But the king wasn't going to let this humiliation slide. His voice, though trembling with anger, was still as commanding as ever. "You foolish human," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You have no idea what you've just done. You've signed your own death sentence. The Galactic Council will crush you, and Earth will be nothing but a distant memory." His words, venomous and cold, were meant to instill fear, but they only fueled Sander's resolve. Xander, standing firm in the face of the king's threats, didn't flinch. His eyes burned with the fire of defiance. He had no fear of the king's words. He had crossed this line for a reason, and he would stand by it. This was not just a slap. It was a message, a declaration of humanity's strength and resilience. The king could threaten all he wanted, but Sander knew one thing for sure: humanity would never back down. For a split second, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The king's anger simmered just beneath the surface, and Sander could feel the weight of the galaxy watching them. He had to be ready for whatever came next. Would the king strike back? Would the council turn against him? Or would Xander's bold move change the course of the entire galaxy? Xander's breath quickened, his heart still pounding, but he remained unshaken. The slap had been his defiance, but now it was a rallying cry. A cry that could be heard across the galaxy. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity wasn't insignificant. And if they were going to fight, they would fight with everything they had. The fight for respect had begun. The fight for Earth's future had just taken a dramatic turn. In that moment, Sander realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Earth. It was about every human who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or underestimated. It was about showing the entire galaxy that Earth would not bow to the whims of the Galactic Council. This was more than a rebellion. It was the beginning of a revolution. The king's next move would define the future of the galaxy, but one thing was certain: humanity had made its stand, and there would be no turning back. The Galactic Council's shocked when a human slaps the king. The news of Xander's bold defiance had spread like wildfire across the galaxy. What was once considered a small, insignificant planet, Earth, was now at the center of a storm. Humanity, mocked and belittled for centuries, had just made an unforgettable statement. The slap heard across the Galactic Council had changed everything. In an instant, Earth was no longer a mere footnote in galactic politics. It was now a force to be reckoned with. The council, infuriated by the slap, wasted no time in reacting. The king, his pride shattered, immediately ordered a military strike to punish humanity for the audacity of their actions. His voice echoed through the halls of the Galactic Council, calling for vengeance, promising retribution. "Prepare to teach these ants a lesson they will never forget," he thundered. The alien species that had once looked at Earth with disdain now saw it as a threat that had to be extinguished. Across the galaxy, fleets of warships mobilized at an alarming speed. The Council's elite strike force, an advanced military faction known for its ruthless efficiency, was dispatched with orders to destroy Earth, their target, the very homeworld that had dared to challenge their power. The strike force, led by the most experienced generals in the galaxy, was known for its devastating weaponry, superior technology, and swift, calculated strikes. Humanity, despite its newfound defiance, was hopelessly outmatched. But the humans were not as powerless as the Council believed. Xander, still reeling from the shock of his own actions, had been preparing for this day long before the Council even knew Earth's name. During a covert mission to an abandoned alien research station, Xander and his team had stolen top-secret alien technology. Advanced cloaking devices, powerful AI drones, and weapons that could turn the tide of any battle. What the Council didn't know was that Earth's human soldiers were far more prepared than anyone had imagined. As the news of the military strike reached Earth, the entire planet went into high alert mode. Cities began fortifying themselves, and military bases were activated with lightning speed. Every soldier, every civilian was ready to fight. The humans had been underestimated for too long, and now they had the means to prove their worth. Xander, now a symbol of humanity's resilience, stood at the forefront of the resistance. His bold move had sparked something deep within the hearts of the people, a burning desire to protect their home and show the galaxy that Earth would not bow to anyone. The tension was unbearable as the Council's fleet arrived in orbit around Earth. The human forces, armed with alien technology, had prepared for the worst. Xander's team, using the cloaking devices and AI drones, infiltrated the alien ships undetected, striking with precision and efficiency. The human resistance launched a surprise counterattack, their ships emerging from the shadows to take on the alien fleet. The first shots were fired, and the space around Earth was lit up by the fiery explosions of battle. The battle was nothing like the galaxy had ever seen. The Council's fleet, once considered unstoppable, now found itself facing an unexpected force. The humans fought with a ferocity and determination that stunned their enemies. Their ships were faster, their attacks more unpredictable, and their use of advanced alien technology gave them a fighting chance against the Council's superior forces. The battle waged on in space, with epic space battles unfolding in the heavens above Earth. Alien ships collided with human vessels, their shields shattering under the barrage of fire. The sound of lasers and explosions echoed in the vast emptiness of space. Xander's forces launched a coordinated assault, using cloaking devices to ambush the alien ships, striking from unexpected angles. The human ships darted through the debris, their weapons unleashed with deadly precision. Down on Earth, the humans prepared for the inevitable invasion. The ground forces mobilized as alien landing crafts descended from the skies. Cities became battlegrounds, and soldiers took to the streets, ready to defend their homes at all costs. The humans fought not just for survival, but for their honor and their future. They had been mocked and dismissed for so long, and now it was time for the galaxy to see what they were capable of. The action was intense. Orbital bombardments lit up the sky as the battle for Earth reached its climax. The human forces, though outnumbered, held their ground with unwavering resolve. The aliens were forced to fight on humanity's terms, caught in the chaos of a battle they had never anticipated. Xander's leadership shone through, his strategies and quick thinking keeping his troops one step ahead. But even the most skilled warriors couldn't prepare for the losses they would face. Amidst the chaos of battle, Xander's heart sank as he received the news of Bonner's death. Bonner, a trusted soldier and one of Xander's closest friends, had been struck down in a surprise attack during a skirmish on Earth's surface. The loss was devastating. Bonner had been a loyal member of the team, always ready to fight and always by Xander's side. His death, the first major casualty of the war, felt like a personal blow to Xander. As Xander looked down at the lifeless body of his fallen comrade, the weight of the war settled heavily on his shoulders. He had always known the fight would be costly, but the reality of losing someone so close was a gut-wrenching reminder of the stakes. Bonner had died fighting for a cause bigger than himself, and Xander knew that his death would fuel the fire of revenge in the hearts of the human soldiers. Xander's eyes burned with fury as he swore to avenge his fallen friend. His grief gave way to a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't afford to break down. Not now. The human forces, spurred on by Bonner's sacrifice, rallied with a newfound intensity. The loss of one soldier was devastating, but it had united humanity in a way nothing else could. Every soldier on Earth now fought for Bonner, for Earth, and for the future of their people. As the battle raged on, the humans continued to hold their ground. The alien strike force, once confident in its superiority, was beginning to falter. The surprise resistance and the human soldiers' unwavering resolve had caught them off guard. It was becoming clear that humanity wasn't the weak, insignificant species they had once been labeled as. They were fighters, and they had more than just technology on their side. They had something far more powerful: their will to survive, their sense of unity, and their belief in their future. The stakes had never been higher. The Council had underestimated humanity for too long, and now they were learning the hard way that Earth was not a planet to be dismissed. The war had only just begun, and Xander knew that this was just the first of many battles. But one thing was certain: humanity would never back down. No matter the cost, they would fight until their last breath. The fight for Earth's future had only just begun, and it would take more than an army of aliens to break the spirit of the human race. As the human forces clashed with the aliens, the galaxy watched in awe, stunned by the underdog victory unfolding before their eyes. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for respect. It was a fight to show that humanity, despite being small and underestimated, could stand toe-to-toe with the mightiest forces in the galaxy. And with each passing moment, humanity proved that they would not be ignored. The war between humanity and the Galactic Council had reached a terrifying new level. The Council, in its anger and desperation, had unleashed its most powerful weapon: a massive warship capable of obliterating entire planets. This behemoth, known as the Goliath, was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Its weapons were designed to destroy entire cities in a single strike, and its defenses were impenetrable. The Goliath was a symbol of the Council's power, a tool of destruction meant to crush any resistance. But Xander and the human resistance were not about to give up. They had already proven that humanity was capable of defying impossible odds. Now the fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. Xander, along with his most trusted team, prepared for one final desperate assault. The stakes were higher than ever before. This was the last chance to stop the Council and ensure humanity's survival. The Goliath was on a direct course for Earth, its engines glowing ominously as it moved closer to the planet. It was unstoppable, and its arrival signaled the final push of the war. For Xander and his team, it was a do-or-die mission. If they failed, Earth would be lost. But if they succeeded, the Galactic Council would be crippled, and humanity would have a fighting chance. The plan was simple but dangerous. Xander and his team would infiltrate the Goliath, use the stolen cloaking technology to sneak past the guards, and plant explosive charges in the warship's core. These charges would destroy the ship from the inside, hopefully stopping the Council's forces before they could carry out their destructive mission. But time was running out. The warship was just hours away from arriving at Earth, and every second counted. As Xander and his team made their final preparations, the tension was palpable. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them. They knew that if they failed, they would be lost, and Earth would fall into the hands of the Council. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they weren't going to stop until the job was done. The journey to the Goliath was harrowing. The team traveled aboard a stealth ship, using the cloaking technology to avoid detection as they approached the warship. The massive vessel loomed ahead, its dark silhouette filling the sky. The Goliath was a terrifying sight, a fortress in space, bristling with weapons and shields. But the human team was undeterred. They knew that their only hope lay in getting aboard and planting the charges that could destroy it. The plan to infiltrate the ship was as risky as it was bold. The Goliath was heavily guarded, and the slightest mistake could alert the entire crew. But Xander and his team had one advantage: the cloaking technology. With it, they could slip past the guards unnoticed, at least for a while. As they boarded the ship, the team was eerily quiet, focused on their mission. Every step was calculated, every move was deliberate. They had no room for error. Inside the Goliath, the team split up to cover more ground. Xander led the way, his heart pounding in his chest. Every corridor they passed seemed to stretch on forever, and the silence was deafening. They moved swiftly, knowing that time was running out. Every few seconds, the countdown in their minds grew louder. The charges had to be set in the ship's core before it was too late. As they made their way deeper into the ship, the tension grew. They encountered a few patrols, but with their cloaking devices, the humans were able to avoid detection. However, as they neared the core, the stakes escalated. The ship's defenses had become more sophisticated, and the crew was on high alert. The sound of alien footsteps echoed through the corridors, and Xander's team had to fight their way through. The first battle inside the Goliath was a blur of laser fire and shouts. The team fought fiercely, using their superior knowledge of the ship's layout to gain the upper hand. But the alien forces were formidable, and the humans were quickly outnumbered. Xander's pulse raced as the team pushed forward, determined to reach the core. But with every step, the resistance grew stronger. Time was running out. The countdown was ticking away, and the Goliath was still on course to reach Earth. The team had to act fast. Xander's mind raced as he directed his team to plant the final charges in the core. The explosion would be massive, enough to cripple the warship and halt its deadly assault on Earth. But they would have to make it out of the ship before the charges detonated. If they didn't, the Goliath would take them down with it. As the final charges were set, Xander felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. He had promised his team they would make it out alive. But as the seconds ticked by, he realized that not all of them would make it. The explosion was inevitable, and there was no time to waste. As they made their way back to the escape pods, chaos erupted around them. The Goliath shook violently, as if protesting the impending destruction. Explosions rang out as the humans and aliens clashed in a final brutal confrontation. The ship's corridors became a maze of destruction, with debris falling from the ceiling and walls crumbling under the force of the explosions. Xander's team fought with everything they had, determined to make it out alive. But the odds were against them. The Council's forces were relentless, and the ship was beginning to implode. Xander's thoughts turned to Bonner, the soldier who had been with him through thick and thin. Bonner had been one of the first to join the human resistance, and he had always been by Xander's side. But as the team made their way to the escape pods, Bonner was struck by a blast. Xander's heart sank as he saw his friend fall, his body lifeless in the wreckage. He knew there was no time to save him. The mission had to come first. Tears welled up in Xander's eyes as he glanced back at Bonner's body, but there was no time for grief. The charges were set, and the Goliath was on the verge of destruction. The escape pods were ready, but the team had to hurry. With a heavy heart, Xander made the difficult decision to leave Bonner behind. His friend had sacrificed everything for the mission, and Xander couldn't let that sacrifice be in vain. As Xander and the remaining members of his team boarded the escape pods, the final explosion rocked the Goliath. The warship erupted in a massive burst of energy, sending shockwaves through space. The blast was visible from Earth, a brilliant flash of light in the sky. The Goliath was no more. The human resistance had won, but the cost had been high. As Xander looked down at Earth, his heart heavy with loss, he knew that the fight was far from over. The Council had been dealt a significant blow, but there was still much to be done. Humanity had proven that it could stand up to the most powerful forces in the galaxy, and though the war had taken a toll on them, the human spirit remained unbroken. The people of Earth celebrated their victory, but the weight of the sacrifices made that day hung over them. Bonner's sacrifice would never be forgotten, and neither would the countless others who had given their lives for the future of humanity. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Xander, with a heavy heart, knew that the fight for Earth's future had only just begun. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity once again, but this time, humanity would not be so easily defeated. The war that had ravaged the galaxy for so long had finally reached its most pivotal moment. Humanity, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, had shown the universe that they could not only stand their ground, but also strike back with a vengeance. The destruction of the Galactic Council's flagship, the Goliath, had proven that Earth was no longer a mere pawn in the hands of the alien powers. It was a force to be reckoned with, a force that would not bow down or surrender to oppression. The victory sent shockwaves across the galaxy, leaving the Council reeling and uncertain of its future. But even as the Goliath burned in the depths of space, the war was far from over. The Galactic Council, though humiliated, was not willing to go down without a fight. Their king, a cruel and ruthless ruler, had escaped the destruction of the flagship, and he retreated to a remote moon to lick his wounds. The other alien species, once loyal to the Council, began to question their allegiance. The defeat of the Goliath had sparked doubt among the alien factions. If humanity could destroy such a powerful warship, what else were they capable of? For the first time, the once unquestioned authority of the Council was being challenged. Xander, the human resistance leader, knew that this victory was just the beginning. The battle against the Council had been hard fought, and the cost had been high. But it was not over yet. The king was still alive, and as long as he remained free, the galaxy would remain in turmoil. Xander understood that to secure humanity's future, the king had to be defeated once and for all. The resistance had to take the fight directly to the source. The final confrontation was set. Xander and his team tracked the king to a desolate moon, hidden away on the outer edges of the galaxy. It was an isolated, inhospitable place, far from the watchful eyes of the Council. The king had retreated there, thinking he could regroup and plot his next move in secrecy. But Xander knew that it was the perfect place to end the war. The king had been the symbol of the Council's tyranny, and with him gone, the galaxy would finally be free. As Xander and his team approached the moon, the tension was palpable. The stakes had never been higher. The war had taken its toll on everyone involved, and Xander couldn't afford to lose anyone else. The weight of the past battles, the loss of friends, and the responsibility of leading humanity hung heavily on his shoulders. But he also knew that this was the moment that would define his legacy. He had already led humanity through impossible odds. Now, it was time to finish what they had started. The final battle was brutal. The king, though weakened by the loss of his flagship, was still a powerful adversary. His forces, though smaller in number, were highly trained and determined to protect their ruler at all costs. But Xander and his team were ready. They had learned from their past battles, and their unity and determination made them a formidable force. The battle unfolded in a flurry of gunfire, explosions, and close combat. The desolate moon's surface became a war zone, with the ground shaking under the intensity of the fight. The king's soldiers were fierce, but Xander and his team fought with everything they had, determined to bring the war to an end. It was a fight to the death, and only one side would emerge victorious. As the battle raged on, Xander made his way through the chaos, moving toward the king's last stronghold. The king, in all his arrogance, was holed up in a heavily fortified command center, waiting for his chance to strike back. But Xander had other plans. He had learned from his past mistakes and knew that this time he couldn't afford to fail. This was their last chance to end the war once and for all. The tension in the air was thick as Xander confronted the king. The two men, both battle-weary and scared, stood face to face. The king's eyes burned with hatred, while Xander's gaze was cold with determination. For a moment, there was silence, an eerie calm before the storm. The king sneered at Xander, mocking him for daring to challenge his authority. "You think you can defeat me, human?" The king spat. "You are nothing. Your kind is weak, inferior." Xander's response was simple. "We'll see about that." With those words, the final battle began. The king lunged at Xander, his strength and fury unmatched. But Xander was ready. He fought with a ferocity that matched the king's, his every move calculated and precise. The clash of their weapons echoed through the command center, and the ground beneath them trembled with the force of their strikes. But Xander was more than just a skilled fighter. He had something the king lacked: the unwavering will to protect his people. The king's arrogance had blinded him to the strength of humanity, and that was his downfall. Xander's determination gave him the edge he needed to land the final blow. In a swift, decisive movement, Xander disarmed the king and knocked him to the ground. The king, defeated and humiliated, looked up at Xander with hatred in his eyes. But Xander didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and delivered the final strike, ending the reign of the Galactic Council once and for all. As the king's body hit the ground, the lights in the command center flickered, signaling the end of the battle. The war was over. The galaxy had changed forever. With the fall of the king, the Galactic Council's hold on the galaxy was broken. The other alien species, once so loyal to the Council, began to question their allegiance. Many of them had seen firsthand the strength and resilience of humanity, and they began to reconsider their place in the galaxy. Xander's victory had sent a clear message. Humanity was no longer the weak, defenseless species that the Council had once dismissed. They were a force to be reckoned with. As Xander stood over the fallen king, looking out over the battlefield, he knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured. The Council's reign had come to an end, and a new era was beginning. The camera zoomed out, showing Earth in the distance, free and strong. The once dominant alien powers were now in disarray, and humanity stood as the new power in the galaxy. The final shot of the scene showed Xander looking out over Earth, his face resolute. The war was over, but the journey was just beginning. Humanity had proven its strength, but the challenges ahead were still vast. The galaxy was a big place, and there were many more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in history, humanity stood united, ready to face whatever the future held. The world had changed, and humanity had earned its place in the stars. They were no longer the underdogs. They were no longer the victims. They were the victors. And with that victory, a new era had begun, a new chapter in humanity's story, one that would be written in the stars.